I'm Adam Reilly. Tonight on Greater Boston, thousands of newspapers have closed across the U.S., and nearly half of the country doesn't have a single local news source. So how can we keep local journalism alive? I'll talk with one of the authors of What Works in Community News. Plus, U.S. airlines say so-called Sustainable Aviation Fuels will help them hit net zero emissions by 2050, but a new study suggests otherwise. And finally, when some test results and a phone call from his doctor changed life as he knew it, Gerard Quintanar found solace from an unlikely source. He shares his story ahead. It has been a rough year for the news business. Hundreds of journalists have been laid off or bought out from papers across the country, from the LA Times and Business Insider to the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post. And those are just the national outlets. According to a study from Northwestern, about 2,500 newspapers have closed since 2005. That's more than a quarter of the papers in the country. And more than half of all U.S. counties have little or no access to local news. It's a problem my next guest tackles in the new book, What Works in Community News: Media Startups, News Deserts, and the Future of the Fourth Estate. Co-author Dan Kennedy joins me now. He's also a journalism professor at Northeastern University, the author of the blog Media Nation, and a former colleague of mine at the Boston Phoenix. Dan, excellent to see you, as always.
Good to see you, Adam.
To kick us off, can you give viewers some examples of outlets here in Massachusetts that have either died completely or just withered away over the course of the past few years?
Well, I think probably the best example of that would be the weekly papers that were owned by the Gannett newspaper chain in eastern Massachusetts. They have basically gotten out of the weekly newspaper business, and weeklies are really what drives small town coverage.
Are these the old community newspaper companies?
The old community newspaper company, absolutely. And within the last couple of years, they have either closed or merged several dozen papers. They tell people, well, we're doing it online. Well, no, they're not. If you go to their websites, you're likely to get news from anywhere in the region except your hometown. So that would probably be the prime example.
Yeah, those are some big losses. And when I see those papers now, you'll see one community paper having coverage from somewhere that's a 45-minute drive away. It's
absolutely. And Gannett has some dailies, too, but those are skeletal staffing these days.
You and Ellen Clegg, your co-author, write that this attrition has been driven by chains like Gannett, as you mentioned, hedge fund firms like Alden Global Capital. Why are entities like that so keen on acquiring and running papers like this if the papers themselves struggle to turn a profit and stay afloat?
Well, first of all, there are real problems in the newspaper business. I mean, I think Craigslist, Google, and Facebook have completely hollowed out the advertising that was the base of newspaper revenues for generations. But what Ellen and I argue is that even with all that money being taken off the table, newspapers are still bringing in some revenues, and that money could have been used to invest in the future. It could have been used to invest in a better customer experience. And instead, the Gannett's and the Alden Global Capitals saw an opportunity to come in and grab those shrinking revenues, continue to cut the newsrooms, and enrich their shareholders and pay down debt.
Yeah, it seems like it works pretty well for that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Okay, so I should accentuate the positive a little bit, because the book is packed with examples of new entities or existing entities that transform themselves, that have found a way to survive and thrive, even in this really bleak climate that you're talking about. One of the outlets that you focus on, and I know you've spent a lot of time talking with the guy who runs it, the people who are part of it, is the New Haven Independent. What is the New Haven Independent, and how has it evolved over the years?
The New Haven Independent is one of the very first digital-only nonprofit websites covering a community. It was actually the principal subject of a book I wrote 10 years ago called The Wired City. So why did we go back? The reason we went back, well, first of all, the pizza, but second of all, when I was reporting on The Independent 10, 15 years ago, you had a small all-white staff covering a community that has a large politically engaged Black community, a Latino community, and I thought that they were doing a pretty good job given those limitations, but those are real limitations. What happened was a few years after that book came out, The Independent launched a low-power community radio station, WNHHLP. The signal is so weak that most people listen to it online. They have about 40 hosts now, almost all of them people of color. They have an amazing morning host named Babs Rawls-Ivy, who just does 2 hours of incredible radio every morning. She free associates, she interviews authors, artists, politicians, and it's given The Independent a completely different feel, much more diversity.
That's fascinating.
And it really serves New Haven in ways that it wasn't able to do before.
Another outlet that I know you find instructive and fascinating is the Colorado Sun. Briefly, what should people know about the story of the Colorado Sun?
Well, what attracted me to the Sun is that they have adjusted to different opportunities that they see come up. And this normally takes me about 10 minutes to explain, so I'll try to give you the speed version. When they first started, by the way, 10 people who had left the Denver Post because of all of the cuts imposed by Alden Global Capital, they began thinking that they were going to be supported by crypto in some way and published on the blockchain.
Very au courant.
Yes. And, you know, you laugh. They actually did get some crucial startup money out of that before the scheme fell apart the way all things crypto do. Their next step was to form a public benefit corporation, which is a for-profit. And they also worked with a nonprofit organization so that foundations and individuals could donate to the nonprofit and support certain types of public interest journalism at the Sun. By the way, that's becoming a fairly typical model, Provincetown Independent, Berkshire Eagle. And then finally, they've gone fully nonprofit. So it's a great story about a group of people who are not only doing great journalism, but they see opportunities open, they see old opportunities start to fade away, and they move quickly.
You know, that gets directly to the question I wanted to ask next, which was, you say the book is an anti-manifesto, that you're not trying to tell people, here's the way you got to do it. But my assumption would be that as you look at all these examples, and you also talk with a bunch of individuals who are active in this space, that there are certain things that emerge as through lines. Am I right about that? Nimbleness, I would think, would be one of them.
I'm sorry, what?
Forgive me, nimbleness, I would think.
Nimbleness, absolutely. The other thing is most of what we looked at are nonprofit and digital only because that seems to be the easiest way to go, get some money, do the journalism. However, we looked at legacy newspaper, the Star Tribune in Minneapolis, where you grew up.
Yes, I still read that online, actually.
We looked at a large public television operation in New Jersey that merged with a public policy website that had started. So, yeah, nimbleness and being willing to move where the opportunities are is very important, but one of the other things we like to say is that anything can work and anything can fail. It really, a lot of it depends on visionary leadership at the local level.
And that's, I would think, tough to come by.
Well, yes, it is indeed.
A lot of the organizations that you talk about are reliant on the largesse of grant-making organizations that want to do good civic work, right? Is that also an essential to succeed in this space?
If you're a nonprofit, yes, absolutely. But there are some projects that have done it. There are nonprofits that it's kind of been a slog. They don't really have those 1, 2, or 3 big funders. So they get support from voluntary contributions from readers like you. And they do events. That can be a business. They do underwriting, which is, as we know, is advertising. But you're right. A lot of them are dependent on a few big funders.
We've only got about half a minute left for you to answer this question. What are some examples of local outlets here in the Boston area that are doing the kind of stuff you write about in the book?
Well, since the Gannett implosion, we've seen a lot of projects launched.
Yeah.
One I definitely want to mention, or I'll be in trouble, is Ellen's project, which is Brookline.News, which is a nonprofit. She's the co-founder. They have an active board. They have a professional paid editor. They've been able to raise money, and they're doing a terrific job.
I do feel like anytime I pick up, there it is, pick up the paper. If I actually pick up the paper, I'm learning about some new organization doing this kind of work, which wasn't there before, which is uplifting. And for anyone who says, if I were a parent, I would tell my kids not to get into journalism, the book is a very nice corrective to that. It's also a lot of fun to read. It's really well written, really well organized. So
Thank
congratulations.
You,
Dan Kennedy, awesome to see you. Thanks for being here.
Great to see you, Adam.
Next up, airplane emissions have skyrocketed over the past decade. They're now responsible for nearly 4% of all drivers of climate change, and emissions are on track to triple by 2050, according to the UN. It's a problem the Biden administration has ordered U.S. airlines to address by saying they need to reach net zero emissions also by 2050. And the airlines say they're on track, in large part through the use of what's known as Sustainable Aviation Fuel. But according to a new report from the Institute for Policy Studies, that goal is highly unrealistic. And some of the fuels that the airlines are calling sustainable aren't, in fact. I'm joined by one of the report's co-authors, Chuck Collins, and Florian Allroggen, the executive director of MIT's Lab for Aviation and the Environment and a senior strategic advisor in the Department of Aeronautics and Astronautics. Thank you both for being here. So, Chuck Collins, your report is pretty pessimistic when it comes to at least the current viability of sustainable airline fuels, or SAFs. What are your most important findings?
Well, we really tried to dig into this for a non-scientific reader. There's a lot of claims about sustainable aviation fuels. I think the first thing to say is we should just be skeptical. SAFs, sustainable aviation fuels, means about as much as natural food, meaning we really need to look at the ingredients. But we conclude four things. One is that some sustainable aviation fuels will not necessarily reduce emissions. Second, the ability to scale this to the current levels of aviation, let alone future growth projections, are highly unrealistic. The third concern is who's going to pay for this? I mean, it's going to be billions and trillions of dollars of investment, which brings us to the biggest concern, which is the trade-offs. Is this the best use of public subsidies, of land that will be used for certain types of sustainable aviation fuels? Is this the best investment in terms of decarbonizing our economy? Is this the road we want to go on? And it's relevant because the FAA reauthorization is happening this week. The new SAF credit that's part of the Inflation Reduction Act has just been announced. So we're about to spend billions. And the question is do we really want to go down this road all the way?
Is that money well spent? Okay, Dr. Allroggen, you've obviously got a different vantage point on these issues, given the work that you do. What's your answer to Chuck's question? Is this a road that we want to go down, even if it's a costly one?
I think it is a road that we have to go on because, an aircraft that's being built today is going to fly in 2050 because that's the lifetime of an aircraft. That means we do need a fuel that drives this aircraft in a sustainable way with a lower carbon footprint. Chuck obviously has a point that, there are SAFs that are better in reducing these carbon footprints, and there are SAFs that are worse in reducing these carbon footprints. So we need to look exactly what it is that we produce. And we also have to look at how do we get it to scale? How do we really need the volumes so that we can connect the planet with reduced and ideally eventually zero climate impact?
I had not realized until I tried to give myself a little crash course on this world that the two of you know all about, the extent of different SAFs that are out there. It struck me as a really dizzying array of options. I believe I saw algae mentioned, or an algae-based SAF, food waste, residue from forestry. Dr. Allroggen, are there particular sustainable airline fuels that you think show special promise and that might actually help when it comes to decarbonization?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, because if you look at it from a sustainability perspective, obviously the place where we should try to start are fuels that actually use waste residues, things that we're producing anyways in the agricultural sectors that today we throw away, we may not be using it in efficient ways to actually make SAF out of this. But the problem with that is we know that this is not going to be enough to actually get us to the scale that we need to make enough sustainable aviation fuel. So from there, we need to think about like what realistically can we achieve in the agricultural sectors to make biofuels? And if that is not enough, which may very well be true, we need to think about like where is the carbon come from in a sustainable way that helps us to make these fuels? Maybe we have to get it from the atmosphere directly in the end.
Oh, interesting. Chuck, one thing I remember, tell me if I've got this right from your report, is that when the discussion focuses on plant-based sustainable airline fuels, there are massive I shouldn't say opportunity costs. There are big, what's the economics term that I'm looking for? Externalities that come from ramping up, say, production of a fuel that's based on corn, right? That can create, tell me about those negative consequences that could be attached to expanding growth of certain plants to create sustainable fuels.
You know, one of the things Dr. Allroggen is a terrific scientist on is looking at the life cycle impact of various types of fuel sources. So when we do talk about corn, one of the things that we should factor in is clearing of land. How much land? Will there be trade-offs in terms of food? The World Resource Institute said that to maintain sort of our projection of growth in fuel, we would have to use all the land that's currently being used for corn plus 20%. So that's where it's not that it's not scientifically or technologically possible. I think it's important to say there are some really smart people who are trying to think about what are viable sustainable aviation fuels. It's sort of stepping back and asking these larger policy or trade-off questions or externality questions. You know, is this, you know, are we going to cut down trees in order to grow jet fuel or crops for jet fuel? That's where it might undercut our goals, our larger goals around decarbonization. And if we are going to be using animal fats and other bioproducts, shouldn't we prioritize ground transportation, electrification, other decarbonization needs that affect more people? We're seeing the private jet lobby pushing, saying our answer is SAFs. And our view is the private aviation should be paying its real costs, its environmental and social costs. For starters, we are subsidizing private jets and the aviation sector generally as taxpayers. Do we want to keep doing that compared to other goals in terms of reducing emissions?
Dr. Allroggen, I'm curious, given the research that you do in this area, do you believe that government funding and government incentives are necessary to push the search for SAFs that might work well forward? Or would you say that the industry can be trusted, the airline industry can be trusted on its own to drive that search in collaboration with people like you and your colleagues at MIT, because the stakes for them are so high?
This is a very, very good question. And I think a lot of it comes back to the question on how we as consumers who actually buy flights actually act, right? And we know we look for the cheapest price and we want to fly for that. And we also know that sustainable aviation fuel will be more expensive than a common fuel. So without a policy incentive in that market, how do you actually get the customer to pay that premium? So I think that's the crux of the question here. The next point is we're looking at a very nascent industry that is at the verge of scaling up. We know there's a lot to learn as we really produce more of these fuels over time that can help us bring costs down. So that may be a case where sort of initial subsidies, et cetera, can help us really get into these learning curves. And at the same time, we need to ask ourselves the question, how can we actually create the demand for a product that is now associated with an environmental positive benefit, but at the same time will cost the customer more, which we know is not what they look for.
To my layperson's eye, it is a fascinating topic, which, again, I knew nothing about. So thank you for filling me in and filling our viewers in. Chuck, if people want to see the report that you prepared, where do they go?
They can go to Institute for Policy Studies, ips-dc.org, and check out and ask, explore these questions. They're really interesting. Our view is we're going to actually have to fly less if we want to reduce carbon emissions. And nobody's really saying that.
Well,
we're going to have to dial down our aviation consumption, starting with private jets.
Tricky case. It's going to be a tricky case, as you know better than me, to make to a lot of people. But point taken. Chuck Collins and Dr. Florian Allroggen, thank you for talking this through. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Finally, tonight, Gerard Quintanar was at the top of his career when he got a call from his doctor that changed everything. On GBH's Stories from the Stage, he explained what happened next and how grabbing Chinese food for lunch one day helped him navigate it all. We bring you Gerard's story now as part of a partnership between that show and this one.
It's 2009. I'm getting my regular haircut, and I notice my right eyelid is drooping. I'm 47 years old, father to 2 young children, husband to a stay-at-home mom, and a director of a large engineering firm. Life is busy, but good. But as I look at my reflection, I know this drooping eyelid could be the sign of a rare progressive disease that runs in my family. Maybe I'm just tired, I think, and I try to ignore it. But over the next few weeks, it doesn't go away. I know there's a test for the disease because my father was tested years before. So I talked to my doctor, who orders a kit. 6 vials of blood are drawn and sent off to a lab. And he gives me a call at work a couple of weeks later on a busy Tuesday afternoon. Hi, Gerard. Just want you to know I have your test results. You may want to come in. With that, I pretty much know the answer. And when I get to his office, he confirms it. Positive. I'm stunned. Even when you think you know what's coming, it hits different when a doctor says it. You have ocular pharyngeal muscular dystrophy, he says. He admits he doesn't know much about the disease because it's so rare. It affects about 1 in 100,000 people worldwide. There is no cure. And I know this drooping eyelid is the least worrisome of the symptoms I'll have to deal with. I go home and have dinner with my family. I read books to my kids as they fall asleep, and I go downstairs and tell my wife the news. She's an engineer as well, so we keep the discussion fairly high level and pragmatic. And after a little while, we agree that we should probably just sleep on it. Well, I don't sleep that much that night. I lay awake mulling over what this diagnosis will mean for my family and for me. I get up in the gray light of dawn, and I look through my bureau for an envelope that contains my father's test results. I find it and put it in my computer bag. And I get dressed, thinking work will be a good distraction. Around lunchtime, I go to the cafeteria where several entrees are being offered. I opt for Chinese food. I place my order to go, and I grab a fortune cookie from a large wicker basket on my way out. Eating my lunch in the solitude of my office, I remove the envelope from my computer bag, and I unfold the papers with my father's results. I place my results next to his. The numerical markers that indicate the severity of the mutations are identical. I glance over at the fortune cookie sitting on my desk and back at the results. Now, I've always thought of fortune cookies as a novelty, nothing to be taken seriously. But today, I really want to know what that fortune says. So I unwrap the cookie and crack it open. Empty. The cookie is empty. In all my years of eating Chinese food, I have never encountered an empty fortune cookie, and today it just seems like a bad sign. What a week I'm having. I close my eyes and I slump down in my chair. I'm exhausted, and this diagnosis is just a new form of stress. Now, for years, I practiced techniques for managing stress and maintaining a positive state of mind. This could be an excellent opportunity to put those techniques to work. So I slowly open my eyes and I look at the cookie pieces. And I try to imagine how this empty fortune cookie could be the sign of something good. And slowly, thoughts of gratitude start coming to mind. How fortunate am I to get my diagnosis at my age, right at the onset of symptoms? How fortunate am I to be able to place my results next to my dad's and seeing that they're identical? I know everything he went through from when he was my age to when he passed away from the disease. How many people get a preview of what is most likely to come? It's scary, but it's also a gift. And right then, I decide to make the most of the time I have left. I push the pieces of cookie aside and I take out a blank sheet of paper. And with scissors, I cut out small, fortune-sized pieces. And I commit to start each day by writing my own fortune. Now, these aren't fortunes that are grandiose, nor are they trivial. But I try to make them predictive of something good that may happen on that specific day. And on many days, they come true. But that's not actually the point. The point is, I believe they are more likely to come true because I write them with intention and hope. Some say, you will find a funny story to bring home to your family tonight. Or you will inspire a young leader who has taken on a challenging role. When the call for storytellers went out, I wrote myself a fortune that I would be selected to stand on this stage and tell you this story tonight. So today, the fortune is for you and I alike. It simply reads, you will write your own fortune today. Thank you.
You can catch more stories from the stage Mondays at 9:30 p.m. on World and Fridays at 8 here on GBH2, or anytime on the Stories from the Stage Facebook page and YouTube channel. That is it for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for watching. I'm Adam Reilly. Good night.